The end of the Second World War can be considered to be a key milestone after which various societies and nations accelerated their search for self-determination. Initially, they were limited to the various colonies trying to break away from their colonial past. Thereafter, it changed to addressing inequalities in the existing system and ranged from civil rights movements to anti-apartheid struggle, from breaking down totalitarian system to searching for a homeland. One of the biggest examples of nations breaking free and becoming independent after the Second World War is India. While it did start a domino effect of other nations in Asia, Middle East, and Africa gaining independence, the immediate impact of the Indian independence was not pretty. It brought immeasurable pain, suffering, misery, and death to millions of people. The world saw one of the worst examples of ethnic cleansing in the name of religion.
In March 1947, Earl Louis Mountbatten and his wife Edwina arrive in New Delhi. The great-grandson of Queen Victoria and second cousin to George VI, Mountbatten brings a regal presence to the drama of India's independence. As the last viceroy, he bears responsibility for India's fate.
2nd of April, 1947. I have now completed my first week in office. I should like to be able to paint an encouraging picture of my first impressions, but feel it would be misleading if I did so. The scene here is one of unrelieved gloom. At this early stage, I can see little common ground on which to build any agreed solution for the future of India. The only conclusion I have been able to come to is that unless I act quickly, I may well find the real beginnings of a civil war on my hands.
By May, attempts to create a unified India have failed. Gandhi retreats from political life. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, leader of the Muslim League, and Jawaharlal Nehru of the Indian National Congress concede to divide India. Fearing a total loss of control, Mountbatten brings forward the transfer of power to August. Two nations will be created by partition, a secular India and a new homeland for India's Muslims, Pakistan.
Long years ago, we made a tryst with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge, not wholly or in full measure, but very substantially. At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom.
The birth of a new nation came with a cost, especially for the people along the border areas. However, the impact was different in different parts of the country, with the southern half of the country being relatively calm throughout. The commercial capital of Bombay recovered quickly and even started to thrive in one of the most ethnically mixed cities of the world.
I remember 1947, I was about 5 years old, and I had just about joined school that time. And in school also, we had a lot of Muslim students with us, apart from the Hindus. There was news about people going to the streets and celebrating, enjoying themselves. But unfortunately, India got partitioned into Pakistan and India, which was, I think, rather unfortunate because there were so many millions of deaths concerned in that. Shifting of population from India to Pakistan and Pakistan to India, that was most unfortunate. I heard on the radio about people, so many being killed across the border but I didn't have the chance of meeting anybody who came from Pakistan because they were mostly settled in northern India. After independence, every day we heard was bad news about how many people died. It was always miserable to switch on the radio after independence. But we did used to switch it on to get some idea what was happening. Actually, I didn't like the idea of partition, basically, because I didn't see any difference between Muslims and Hindus. If there was no partition, there would not have been so much of misery. One thing I noticed was before independence, the Muslims were segregated where they lived, mostly in Dindi Bazaar, Muhammad Ali Road, and those areas, or towards the harbour line. There are 3 lines, railway lines there. One is Bombay Central, one is Boribandar Central Railway, and the other was harbour line, which used to lead towards the industrial area. There used to be more towards that area. And they didn't mind mingling with the non-Muslim people, and neither did we mind mingling with them. But only they lived segregated. And after independence, they moved more freely, mixed more freely with us people. I'm a Hindu, they mixed with us more freely. Even the students were happy that the independence was declared, and we started even sharing food with them in school. As a child, I found no difficulty living with the other community. It sort of, after independence, you felt more free to mix with each other. And I was not much into politics, so I can't say much about that. But life was definitely much easier after independence. I did go to a finishing school in Switzerland. They didn't treat us any different than other children, not really. We were treated equally. By the time I reached college, people were more, shall I say, determined to get what they want and do what they become what they wanted to be in life. There were some, I was in St. Xavier's College, and there were some who wanted to join the film industry. They managed to do it. And there were some who wanted to open industry. They managed to do it. Some of them were friends of mine. I mean, there was more freedom for them to select what they wanted to do in life. And after independence, women started getting educated more, which they weren't normally. They would only go to school, not to colleges. Once they started going to colleges, then they looked forward to getting a job. I saw that women who were working, not that they were not allowed to work in offices, but somehow there was some distinction, some differentiation. Always they felt how they were treated and how the men were treated. That I think may be still there, I'm not sure. I think there's a lot of pressure on the Britishers to leave. Whatever little I know is, I was informed by my father about Gandhi's influence and what all he helped in getting India independent. I think Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru spoke well on behalf of the Indians. That nearly convinced them. There was time to leave them and let the nation chalk out their own life. So I think Mahatma Gandhi did play a big role in pressurizing the Britishers. I don't think it was a violent part, but it was probably the non-violence attitude that Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru adopted that maybe helped them realize that we are probably at a stage when we can make our decisions and make a proper nation out of it. That's my perception. I think every new nation has its ups and downs. And being ruled for many, many years by this Nehru family, they had the same sort of way of thinking, but now we have different parties. They have really come up and there are different ways of thinking. So, with so many parties, you definitely end up doing something better.
changing world order also created questions about existing systems in established nations in Europe and Americas. These range from the younger generations demanding greater freedom of expressions to challenging their nation's involvement in various wars and conflict, to questioning deep-rooted racism and injustice. The US in the early 70s is a great example of such a society in turmoil.
I'm a baby boomer, which means I was born between 1946 and 1964. I was born in 1956, so I grew up in Mountain Lakes. My dad was born here in Mountain Lakes in 1925, and my mom moved here when she was about 15. So both my mom and dad grew up in Mountain Lakes. When I was growing up, I had both sets of grandparents in Mountain Lakes. Talk a little bit about the town at the time. Was predominantly, I would say predominantly a Protestant white community, probably not too different from many suburban towns in the area. No African American or very few minorities lived in town. The average family size was about, probably, we had 4 kids in my family, and that was not considered a large family. In my neighborhood, there was a couple of families with 5 or 6 and one with 7 or 8. So the houses were full of kids, but that was the baby boom. Most of the houses had not changed much since when they were built in 1920 or so. So the big houses were, most of the bedrooms were full of kids, and the town was full of kids. So neighborhoods were fun. There was not a lot of organized activities run by adults. There was Little League and Boy Scouts and summer recreation and Hub Lake swimming, but majority of the time in the summer, kids were kind of free range. You played in your neighborhood because the neighborhood was full of kids, and you made up all sorts of games. And honestly, in the summer, you'd rather be outside because the houses were not air conditioned. So you found outside to be a lot more enjoyable. I actually lived up on Laurel Hill. We had a lot of woods behind the house, and I did a lot of camping, camped out a lot at night, and kids were given a lot of freedom. The town was a very safe town. Most people probably did not lock their houses. Most of the moms did not work. Some did, but most probably did not. So as a child, when you went over to somebody's house, their mom was there. So there was a lot of people watching over you, but you had a lot of freedom. There were no cell phones. There were no computers. Television was 7 channels, mostly black and white. Indoor activities were kind of minimal. So on a good day, you were outside, riding your bike, fishing, swimming, just playing. Kids were good at making up games, and without parents overseeing them, kids got pretty good at making up rules, and conflict resolution was something that kids learned how to do. Sometimes it wasn't done in the nicest way, but conflicts were handled. And the kids got along. Your mom wasn't going to drive you across town to go to a friend's house. You pretty much played with the friends in your neighborhood, and you had to get along with the friends in your neighborhood. My mom wouldn't, if I wanted to go to Boonton when I was 12 or 13, I would get on my bike and go to Boonton or into Denville. So anyway, childhood was different. Not having a computer or indoor activities made a big difference in our lives. If it was a rainy day, you played board games inside, Monopoly or Risk, or you certainly never wanted to tell your mom or dad you were bored, because if you did, you had chores to do. So the town, as a child, you felt very, very secure. The dads mostly commuted to New York by rail or bus. There was certainly a fair amount that worked locally, but come 5:30 or 6 o'clock, dads were home, and most everybody sat down and had dinner together because the mom was home all day and cooked the meal, and very family-oriented time to grow up. Kids might have gone to camp, sleepaway camp in the summer, or family vacations, but most of the time on the weekends you were with your family. Your dad was not looking at his computer on Saturday and trying to do work, or wasn't distracted. But as I got older, there were things happening outside of the town that made you more aware of the world outside, and there was a growing, I guess you call it a movement, but it was called the generation gap between the thinking of the youth and the parents. Parents had grown up with World War II and the Depression, and the baby boomers were growing up in much more of a carefree society. Certainly rock and roll music was changing the landscape, communicating to kids a different message that their parents' music was reflecting, and certainly folk singer like Bob Dylan or Joan Baez were talking about social change. These Times They Are Changing was one of his more famous songs, and so there was a movement going on regarding civil rights, how people were treated, how we treated the environment, whether politicians were being honest, whether young men should be drafted to Vietnam War, in a war that was very much, perhaps that was the biggest issue between the two generations, was is this a just war, and why should we be sending our young men to fight in a country we couldn't even find on a map? Of course, the belief was the communist domino effect, as they called it, was the reason given that we should get involved and protect the South Vietnamese from the communist Chinese. It was basically a civil war that probably wasn't very well understood by the average American. Anyway, the young men were originally, if you were in college, you did not have to serve in the military, which was a little bit unfair to the minorities, because many African Americans and minorities did not have the opportunity to go to college. So I don't know what the percentage was, but certainly in the 60s, a great percentage of the military was, the troops were African American. Average age was probably around 20 or 21, as opposed to World War II, where the average age was probably in the late 20s or mid-20s. So there were many divides between young people and the adults. The adults, the dads would say, well, I fought in World War II and now it's your turn to go fight. But most people could argue that World War II, there wasn't any question why you might go off and fight in Europe or in the South Pacific. But the Vietnam War did not make a lot of sense to a younger generation. So there was a lot going on. Student unrest on college campuses, students taking over the faculty buildings. There were civil rights riots I can remember Newark, 1967, perhaps some of the worst riots in the country. My dad was a fire chief in Mountain Lakes at the time, and I have a memory of him talking about how Mountain Lakes would cover the next town east of us because so many fire departments were fighting fires in Newark that as you moved out west from Newark, the more western towns would have to come up with a plan on how to cover a fire if it were east of Mountain Lakes, because so many fire departments were now in Newark fighting the fires that were set by rioters. So that was that's something I remember, and it kind of stuck with me. I'm going to jump back a little bit, going back to memories of my childhood. I grew up, when I was young, there was the Cuban Missile Crisis, which involved the Soviet Union clandestinely building nuclear missile systems in Cuba, which is less than 100 miles from Florida. And that was very startling to the American government, people in America. It was the country had always been kind of insulated from that threat. So the Cuban Missile Crisis caused in our schools we had drills on what to do if there was a nuclear attack, and we would go out in the hallway and duck down and or get under our desk, and or they showed us where the civil defense building was, or where we'd go if there was an attack. All of this to give you a sense of security. But for me and most of my friends, it was great stress. There was always an underlying anxiety about the threat of a nuclear attack. Even though I was 6 or 7, I didn't quite understand what it meant. But I do remember that being a very troubling time. I do remember when I learned that China had developed the nuclear bomb. I think that was probably 1964 or 63. So there was the Cold War, they called it, and that was an uncomfortable time, not very well understood by me when I was young. But there were a lot of things going on that helped create the generation that I grew up in. And there was a great movement to provide cleaner water and cleaner air. I think there was a book written by Rachel, a book called Silent Spring. It was a very important book in the environmental movement. I believe it was mostly about the use of DDT and how we were killing animals and with the pesticides. So I know in Mountain Lakes we started recycling back in the 60s. People kind of did what they could, and we celebrated Earth Day. I don't know when that started, probably 1968 or something. I remember planting trees, and the town was trying to embrace some of these movements, but the growing up, the kids really rebelled quite a bit. You grew your hair long. That was one way to rebel. So every guy had long hair. That was, if you didn't have long hair, you knew your parents were very strict, or you got a bad report card that month. But it was pretty common to have long hair. But so there was an event in Mountain Lakes when I was about I must have been about 13, there was a new police car purchased in town, and somebody decided to blow it up with a Molotov cocktail. This was the police station at the time was down by what's called Hapgoods now. We called it the market at the time, but the police station was down there. I think that shook the town up a little bit, that this town was not totally insulated from the violence or the anti-war movement. I'm not sure that blowing up the cop car had anything to do with the anti-war movement, but there was a lot of there was just a lot of anxiety and friction between generations. But I guess it culminated with the impeachment of Richard Nixon, with the Watergate hearings that went on all summer. 1974, I just graduated high school, so the hearings went on all summer. I believe in August he resigned, and then Gerald Ford became president. But that was a big deal for the town. We had a senator living in town, a state senator, who during the Watergate hearings it came out that he had made a donation to the Nixon re-election campaign after the cutoff date for contributing money, and because of the Watergate hearings that came out, and that senator, I believe, lost his job. I know he was disbarred.
I say to you today, my friend, so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today I have a dream that one day down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, One day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted. And every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together.
The civil rights movement, there was not a lot of discussion in my household about the civil rights movement. I think being a town that was predominantly white, and it was totally white, I would guess. It wasn't as big an issue as towns that had racial issues. There were none in town because it doesn't mean that people there were certainly people in town that were bigoted and had racial issues, but there wasn't the ongoing issue all the time because the town was basically not integrated. So I remember some kids in high school going down to the big march in Washington, D.C. That was in the late 60s. And I certainly remember when Martin Luther King was assassinated, and I believe I was in 7th grade, 1968 perhaps. And there was a very sympathetic understanding among the kids about the civil rights movement, and certainly there were many parents that were sympathetic to it and understood it. But I think my feeling was in town that I wasn't aware of a great amount of conversation, at least not in my family, and there was very little. So, but I'm trying to remember if we had speakers oftentimes at the high school. When I was in high school, we had different assemblies where speakers would come in and we'd hear different perspectives on all sorts of national events, and those were very well attended and very informative. We might have a military speaker come in, and then you might have an anti-Vietnam speaker come in. So the school provided quite a bit of opposing viewpoints. That was good. We had a fairly active student government. There were quite a few students that were quite outspoken, and certainly as you got closer to the age of 18 and draft age, you became a lot more focused on what was going on in the world. I did receive a draft card, but by then the draft was dwindling down. So I personally had no fear of being drafted. My brother John, who his draft number was quite high, so there was no college deferment at the time, but he was clever enough to go and get into a military school. So he went to a military college, which would give him 4 years before he would be sent off the war. And by then the war ended, so, and then he dropped out of college. When I was in high school, it was divided among the kids. It was not clear cut that not all students were anti-Vietnam. That was and that was true with the country. The country was very divided on that war. Certainly a lot of that thinking came down from the parents at home and conversations that they had with their kids. Not all 17 and 18-year-olds are totally of free thinking. And there was certainly a belief that the military movement, that the Vietnam War was a just one, and communism was not something that lots of people did believe that communism was going to keep moving through country by country. It certainly, after World War II, the Soviet Union gobbled up a lot of countries, and there was a belief that communism would spread. So not every baby boomer was anti-war, and there were certainly clashes on college campuses regarding that. I remember Kent State and the ROTC that unfortunately fired upon the students. I believe those ROTC were actually students of Kent State. So I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure it was the ROTC on campus, but I may be wrong. But there was a lot of sympathy for the Vietnam War, I personally didn't think about it all that much. Early on, I was probably a believer that it was a good thing. I think a lot of people, when they look back now with more clarity, have a better understanding of why it wasn't such a good thing. In the 60s and early 70s, there were lots of social issues going on besides the war in Vietnam and civil rights and the environment. There was also the women's movement and what we call feminism. Certainly some, and that was an easy thing to grasp onto as a woman growing up in Mountain Lakes. It was very close to your heart, and so that movement, as I recall, lots of talk about it with young people and students, and the girls especially. That was very well embraced by most of the kids, and that was one of the easier issues to understand. Like I said, most of the town when I was growing up, the moms did not work. They were home taking care of the house and the kids. But in my class, every girl I knew went to college, and that was same with all the boys. So that was an issue that I don't believe there was much controversy among the kids about that. There may have been some peripheral discussions about it, but certainly it was a different perspective than their parents' perspective. Women saw opportunities through education, and there was a time when women were actually allowed to open up a checking account and take out a loan and get a credit card, and I know my sister got married, I guess her junior year in college, but strangely enough, she had to have my dad sign the paperwork because at that age you couldn't marry without your parents' consent until you were 21, and my sister was 20. But so the women's movement was that was front and center for high school kids.
The role of youth and students in trying to gain greater rights of self-determination and change, establish political and social systems, is sometimes underestimated. The impact is often more lasting than the immediate outcome of any particular movement. The world witnessed one such uprising in China, the Tiananmen protests.
My name is Bobby Joe. I was born in 1974, April, in Beijing, China. And I was born 2 years before the China Cultural Revolution ended. And then after the revolution finished, the entire country's economic still very restricted. Living material include food, clothes, and even the household require a stamp, which the government issue either local stamp you can only use where you live, or called national stamp, which more popular because you can give it to somebody, they can travel to other part of the country and use for themselves. And that's basically lasts through my childhood until I go to elementary school. And that things start changing means it's because China's economic form changed from a government or community party controlled market become more freely organized by individual shops, owners, farmers, and they allow to bring their material, their product to the market and freely trade with individuals. Main leader behind it is the chairman at that moment called, his name is Deng Xiaoping. And he survived from China Cultural Revolution. And he became the chairman of the Communist Party. And he is leading the entire country called economic reform. The entire society looking for a change because they see this community party government is controlled by the community party really corrupted, and they are selling the national material to certain business for their own profit, and also no freedom for speech, no freedom for press, newspaper, TV shows, and they want a change. And this change has been initiated by the student from college. And this is the start of the 1989 Tiananmen Square event. So beginning is in April 1989, April. The student from university from Beijing and soon spread to a lot of major cities in China. They organize event to present their idea how the government should reform and how the human rights should be reformed, how the freedom should be granted. And they negotiate with the government. They present their idea to the government. Two people very important. One people, his name is Hu Yaobang. He was the chairman of the Communist Party. He's the top number one people. Second is the prime minister of China, and his name is Zhao Ziyang. These two people are young, but not the next gender, but they are young compared to the nation founder fathers. And one of the leader remaining in control of the power is Deng Xiaoping. He become behind the scene control the power. So he put Hu Yaobang in the front, Zhao Ziyang in the front, right? And these two, especially Hu Yaobang, carry the economic reform and listening to people's voice, willing to change further and further to reform. Same happened to Zhao Ziyang. But the further they go, the Communist Party feel they are losing their power. And people saying they have corruption internally. They do not want to admit they are doing something wrong. And they want to control continually what people can see, what people can speak, what people can get, as they have been doing since 50 years ago. And this created a big conflict. Very soon, the state-run factories and organizations, people start joining this reform event, because they also see their life is now changing and they don't see a future, and they want to have a better life, basically. And so the event started with occupy important city squares. Tiananmen Square is one of the square, and that starting point is the largest square. And you can see Tiananmen Square is a symbol of the China central power. And the students occupy the Tiananmen Square, and they are sitting in. They occupy constantly for days, weeks of this square, and also they are starting with hunger strike, and try to use those as their bargaining power to negotiate with the government to agree with their reform ideas, at least negotiate a midterm between these two parts. And in return, the government are holding strong positions. They do not want to listen to the students, but except those two peoples, Hu Yaobang and Zhao Ziyang. They're listening. They want to basically accept certain suggestions, but they are facing a big pushback from internal the party. And then all of a sudden, there's one event trigger this Tiananmen Square event. Is the sudden death of Hu Yaobang. He had a heart attack in May of 1989, and his death is way coming as a surprise. And students view their symbol of freedom, symbol of future of China as that, and they have no hope of the country. And then followed by Hu Yaobang's death, and people start coming from all over the country, travel to Beijing to Tiananmen Square. And this Tiananmen Square is the largest square in the world. If you fill up the entire square, people by people, you are literally talking about 1 million people. And plus the nearby street, so you can imagine the population of people present in this center of Beijing and center of the China every single day and protest Prime Minister of China. And his name is Zhao Ziyang. He went to the square himself and talked to the student directly, face to face. And basically, his one sentence becomes so famous. Basically, he said, "I come here too late. I apologize." And that has been broadcast nationwide on the TV news. Why? Because the TV anchor who feel the same way about the national hope lost, and they not fear they will lose their job, put in the jail, they just broadcast this news. And this is completely trigger and the nerve of the Communist Party's leader. So they decide to have the troops, armies come in, try to control. They basically label this student lead event as a not student event anymore. They label as people take over from other purpose. They want to overtaking the party or overtaking the country. So they treat this way. They have the excuse to have the army come in to take over and restore the order. And this is happened right in the center of Beijing. Where I live is about 3 miles away from the square. And I was at 15 years old. And so this event happened in different stages. So one day, my father come back home from work. He basically saying, that's the day he come back. It's June 3rd afternoon. He back from the work, and my uncle and aunt, they visited us in that evening. Over the dinner, my dad still shaking, and he said because where he working, his office is next to the Tiananmen Square on a nearby street. He said, on my way home, as soon as I left my office building, I see the special police force coming out of the nearby buildings and coming to the street, basically push all the protest students on the street. Not only students, it's the factory, the workers, farmers, including teachers, force them, and they all run to this local street because the police force using sticks. They're just hitting people. And my dad, they ran into a local residence. They closed the front door and they were listening outside the people being beat up badly. And then after, I don't know how long, they said maybe an hour, when the police force retreat, they be able to make their way home. And he said, I don't care any other news, any stories people tell, can see it's not true or it's a rumor. I just saw it by my own eyes right in front of me. And if I don't have the opportunity to run into that local resident, I could be the one being hit and injured and may not be able to make home. And he basically told my aunt and uncle, you need to go home immediately tonight, and it's unsafe. So the location where I live is on one side of the square. My uncle and aunt, they living on the other side of the square. So at that time, nobody have cell phone, nobody have phone, right? Because we are just local people, not the businessmen. So asked them to leave at 8:30. So they left. We don't know if they made home or not, right? And then all of a sudden, I don't know, maybe 11, 12 o'clock, I was sleeping and wake up by some cracker sound. And that's the first time I heard gunshot. And that gunshot have two different types of sound. One is definitely is automatic weapons, but some have two. One is if you later on I learned if the soldier shoot the weapon straight to the air, the sound will be really clear. But if the soldier shoot horizontal, basically shooting people, the sound will be much lower volume. And this a mix of these two types of sounds. And this sound not coming from Tiananmen Square. This sound is coming from the street square about, I would say, less than half mile away from my home. And this sound is constantly on and off for the entire night. And then I think next day, when the in the morning, and there are people's. I think, if I recall, I think not wait for the morning. We all went to the street because everybody know there's a troop in the city before this June 3rd, and want to see what happened there. And I think I remember to see there's a group of people, like 3 of them, they're pushing a one like 3-wheel bicycle, has a board, flat board on top, and carry one person who had injured. Don't know how bad that injured, but they rush past my front door, and they probably looking for some hospital or somewhere to save this person's life or treat his injury. And then when the next day, right, that's June 4. So Tiananmen Square event, people label as June 4. Basically, it's starting the evening of June 3rd, lasts until the morning of June 4. And so the news spread out, and so definitely some event, something happened. People got killed or injured from Tiananmen Square. And then from where we live, we barely see any helicopter in my whole life. It never happened. Now there are helicopters fly over our head from square, back to square, and then back again, non-stop for the entire day. And I remember I think I was also part of the young generation angry about the corruptions and the unfair trade and no hope. I think I brought my telescope. I just point that helicopter. I was saying, I want to see who are they and what they look. And one of my neighbor, I call him uncle, pressed down my telescope immediately, saying, just don't point to them. You never know if they have a gun, they may shoot you. And so I learned, okay, that's become really that close, dangerous. And that's happened after for another 5 days, and no school, no one go to work, and the Tiananmen Square being sealed, and nobody can go in, go out. But my father and myself, we made a trip to nearby Tiananmen Square. There's a very popular and famous shopping area about 2 miles outside Tiananmen Square. We always go there to shopping. And so we ride a bicycle one day and want to see what happened around the city. And we made our way to that shopping area. And on the news we heard there are some public transportation bus have been burned, there's tank has been burned, and so on and so, right? So we prepare what we may run into. But when we reach that shopping area, still, I remember there's a army truck completely burned, and right outside a famous restaurant, local restaurant. I went there before, has baozi, has really local food when I was a child. Right outside the store, this is the truck burned. And that's one human-like remaining. You can see it's a seat right in front of this truck on the ground, completely burned. And he has badly injured. I think his internal has been pulled out. So I think that's one of the we can see the tragedy happened to the soldiers because the local people are really angry. They're fighting, and who knows what happened between this soldier and the residents. So he lost his life. He's been killed. It's young people, 20, maybe 18 years old, from army. And then there's more burned tank, bus, and people put the local bus as a method to block up the street, stop the troop to make their way further. And you can see this happen everywhere.
Beijing's Bloody Sunday is history now, but there are visible reminders everywhere of the shocking massacre that occurred here. Burned-out buses and other vehicles are scattered in many sections of the Chinese capital, and the curious are now venturing out of their homes to look at the smoldering aftermath of the violent attack that dealt a staggering blow to the pro-democracy movement in this country. The brutal assault by an estimated 30,000 Chinese troops ended at Tiananmen Square in the heart of Beijing, where thousands of students had been staging a sit-in for democracy for the past 3 weeks. In a last-ditch effort to stop the army, demonstrators tossed firebombs on armored personnel carriers and tanks as they rumbled into the square early Sunday morning. But it was impossible to stop the advance, and eventually the students were forced to evacuate. Soldiers fired automatic weapons into crowds of civilians, and the casualties were staggering. The Chinese Red Cross says at least 2,600 people were killed. The students claim thousands of others were wounded. There has been no official casualty announcement from the Chinese government. Defiant demonstrators have been continuing to skirmish with the army despite its overwhelming presence in and around Tiananmen Square. At one point, they set an ambulance on fire and aimed it at the troops, but the vehicle smashed into a traffic island, and that prompted the soldiers to open fire once more on the students.
Rumor has been broadcast there's a lot of gunshot, and people living in the high-rise building has also been killed by the bullets just flying around freely. And I didn't see anyone killed, but there's a lot of bullet hole on that building. That's real bullet hole on that building. And so that's, I remember this event. And before this June 3rd and 4th, there's a lot of protest, people marching on the street through Tiananmen Square, and I was year 15. School also organized a marching. We have our school banner, and we marching together with our teacher from school, which is, I say, 5-6 miles away from square, all the way to the square, passing through the square. I can see all the people are from students, from university, factories. They're sitting there and passing through. Basically, there's way too many people marching. Basically, just people standing next to each other, and for hours you're marching through. So after this event, this June 4 become a very sensitive keyword or event. No one allowed to talk. The government always nervous every single year when it's June 4 again, and people want to remember it from Hong Kong, from overseas, or even local, but silently remember it. And also the second person I mentioned, the Prime Minister, he lost his power. He put a sort of life sentence, only allowed to stay at his residence. No one allowed to see him, and he's not allowed to leave. And every year, June 4, some people will say, I don't care, I risk my life, I will wait with him to show my respect, which happen every single year. And also the news anchor and a lady, remember her name, Zhao Xian, and she is so brave. She broadcast that news, and also she was wiping her tear away during that news hour, and she lost her job. She never back to as a news anchor, but I think luckily she stayed free. And then a couple years ago, when Zhao Ziyang, the Prime Minister, he passed away, and people everywhere from nation, from even overseas, want to pay a visit to see final word to their friends. And the government, actually the current chairman of the party, Xi Jinping, he from second generation of the founding father for the nation, and he did not force people not to visit. Even himself and his mother paid visit earlier year. And I would say the China has completely changed compared to the time I was born. But still, in China today, you cannot go to Google, cannot searching freely website. You cannot speak completely freely. There are freedom, but with limitations. And there are keywords still prevent for you to search. Drone 4, you try searching this keyword, you won't be able to find stuff. But it's getting closer. Chinese government may finally, eventually admit they did something wrong. And I think the high hope is with the current chairman, and because himself paid a visit to show his respect with his mom to one of the key person of that event.
Other than students, labor is another constituent that has historically played important roles in questioning established systems, initially to address their own specific inequalities, which often has turned out to have had more profound impact. Poland, in the role of the Solidarity movement, is one such example.
Hi, my name is Vito. My wife, Violet. We came to this country 30 years ago. From Poland. The reason we came from there because we just want to have a better life. If you want to hear what was there in a socialistic country, it was very interesting life, which is hard to believe it. My sons, they don't believe what was there, and for normal people, it's just hard to believe it. So, start from the beginning. What we remember is around 70s. Stores were empty. There was no food, just the vinegar on the shelves. If you want to buy something, you have to know somebody because there was no food. You didn't have sneakers, no toys, no clothes. It was like living in outer space, right? So you have to have connection to get anything. And you ask why? Simple. Everything was going to the center of the system, to Moscow, to Russia. So they always denied it because they said, no, this is our system. The system says there are no unemployed people, that everyone is equal, and everyone is happy. Okay? And so that's how we live. That's what taught us in school, that this is the best system you can live in. Right? So we tried, but it was hard for us to believe it. That's why we left our country.
The lackage of food. It was really terrible because later on the communistic party system developed cards for food cards for every item you want to get. You had it was rationalized. So you needed sugar for one person. You could have 1 kilo,
4 pounds.
So which is 4 pounds of sugar per month. Like a pregnant woman could have double that amount. Soap was also scarce. You could have like 2 bars of soap for a month. Detergents like 10 decograms, whatever you think of. The cigarettes, like you have 2 packs of cigarettes per month, you would die. Alcohol, 1 bottle, like 1/2 liter. Shoes, you could have 1 pair of shoes for 1 season. And then you went to the store, guess what? They didn't have your size, so you had to take half a size bigger or 2 sizes shorter, whatever there was. The people were taking.
We have to take it. It was no
and
choice.
same with meat and then other products. But not only that, you had the carts, but a lot of times the people were standing in the queues to get it, and
they didn't provide enough.
They didn't provide enough anyway. So there was no cheese, no sour cream, no no bread, no basic food items, food groups. So I had the privilege to live in a family when my mom was she was a manager in a food store. The same rules applied to them, even worse. They had there were people from government. You call them UBEX or ORMO. That was like groups of people special that were actually spies for the government. So they were everywhere, even in churches. You were standing in line for 2 days to get, for example, meat, chicken, or today, like overnight. You were standing overnight, not 2 days, overnight. Sorry, to get food, to get something.
Yeah, the store opens around 6 o'clock, so you have to be there at 10 p.m. That's what I was doing, 10 p.m. For Christmas. I didn't do it for for Christmas or other holidays. You want to have something nice on the store, on the table. So what I remember, we just, we few our guys, friends, were standing, waiting outside the store from 10 o'clock to 6 a.m. It was fun. We were playing, soccer. It was fun for us, but not for all people. Then, 6 o'clock, they opened the door, and there is not enough food for all the people standing in the line. So if you got ham, it was like, oh my God. So we actually had ham twice a year, for Christmas and for Easter. That's what we had ham. No, not her, because she got a mom in store, so she got more time ham. I have only twice a year. That's why I look so good.
But we didn't have exotic fruit. We only had apples and strawberries in the season. There was nothing like here that you have fruit, whatever fruit you want year round.
Oh, excuse me. We have bananas for Christmas, and we have oranges for Christmas.
Yes.
And you would know they are because the people were just carrying 3 or 4 in the hand, because we didn't have bags or something like here. So everyone. And there was one interesting story. Toilet paper. This was unique item, which you wouldn't believe. And people got it. They were holding them bullets, over your arms, and everyone's holding. Where did you get it? Where did you get it?
It was on a string, actually. The toilet paper on a string, all the rolls, and it was like a wreath. Okay, so everybody was running with it. Where did you get them? Or for example, watermelon. Everybody was carrying through the town. Where did you get that watermelon? Oh, they just throw them in this
We're
stuff.
happy about such a small things. Paper towel, about grapes. It was oh my gosh, where'd you get it? We didn't think about big things that we're missing. We think about small things.
Just to survive.
Just to survive, and we learn about it. This was good. Yeah, you could.
Single person doesn't matter at all.
No.
People don't matter. They could do anything to you they wanted. They just didn't care about people. They care about being in power and have as much as they could. And just you, the regular person, was just nothing.
And maybe that sounds strange, but if you are teenagers and you were dressed different and walking on the street, the cops at the time, they could beat you up first without any saying, and then ask you for IDs. And his ID was okay. And there was no complaints. No one just said, I'm abused or I'm offended. No. They just hit you, beat you up. That's it.
And
because they want to do it. Yeah, the first they beat you, then they ask you. That's the system works. And there was no question. No one could say, I'm offended. No. You just have to do whatever they want you to do. And this was the problem with the system.
People had just had enough. They were at the brink of losing it. Just how many years can you be tortured and
told what to do, how to think. This was the system, you can take as much as you can, but there is a limit. So that's why people just got fed up and start protesting. First protesting when it started of course, the TV didn't say anything because they thought this was like, this starts before, all the process starts before, and, they just got, killed or put to jail. You can read history about Poland. So, most of the time just was very bloody stuff, right? So they just, government thought we're gonna solve the problem the same way what we did before. But they didn't expect that all people's gonna get out from the houses on the street. And this was, for them, was like, oh my God, we can't kill them all, right? So they just, you can see there's like all those people were like a government, they suddenly become our friends. And so we didn't do anything. We didn't, we guys gonna talk, and there was round table, it's gonna talk about how good it's gonna be now. Yes, that's all the start, right? So this was a mistake that, they start talking with the people, they guys actually, hold us and get them the table and give them some position in government. This was the biggest mistake they could do it, because after the years, those people took advantage. But that is government. It's like proletariat, right? And the people are against it, right? So that means something is wrong with the system. So they were just taking care of themselves. This was not like oil farms. The same thing. They were just worried about themselves, building their own roads, having beautiful houses, having all the money, cars, whatever you can imagine. And the rest of the country, they have nothing, right? So the people said, come on, enough is enough. We want to live too, right? Not just to provide you, all the money, all the, whatever we do, and you just take advantage. We want that too, right? So that's how we started. As people start protesting. We don't want much. We want to have just food. That's what normal people want. We don't want, anything special. And that's where it started all the strikes, right? There was nothing in stores. It was not future. There was no future. You could just work, and there was nothing else.
But Wałęsa was the key person, because first strikes was started in Gdańsk. There is a, how is the stocznia? There's a big shipyards, and a lot of people that that they were very poor at the time. They didn't have job, and it's just they went on the streets. I'm not sure how he was promoted, but he was the one probably who was leading. He was a simple person, but he had a voice, and he started it with a group of people, and then it just got bigger and bigger, and finally we.
I was on vacation at the time in Gdańsk, and I was just thinking, right? And at the time we were just taking a cruise on the river and next to the shipyards. And now I just remember, at the time I didn't even think about it. All the workers were sitting, and all the flags were just hanging, all solidarity signs. We're just looking at them, look, they have big break or something. We didn't know what was it. I was maybe 13 or something like that. Right, and then just they didn't know what to say on TV. They didn't say anything. It was like, oh my God!
They tried to
hide all this stuff. And then we came back to to our town. And then my mom and dad just explained us what's going on, right? Because our age is like when you're a kid, you don't care what's going on there. You just want to have fun, right? And this is where they started.
Religion, because Poland is very Christian country, and what the system wanted to do to us, to erase all the traces of God. There is no God, doesn't exist. Whoever held any position couldn't go to church, couldn't go to mass on Sunday, couldn't baptize or kids. They couldn't take marriage in church. They couldn't marry in church, because it was against the system. So what people were doing, they were going to churches in other towns, to Christian babies, to towns that other people wouldn't know them.
The people they had some positions like directors or whatever it was. They still believe it, but they knew if you just show them that you believe, you lose all the position or you lose all the benefits, right? So you have to choose what you want. You want to be, have some position, or just forget about God, or just, sneak and go, to other churches.
And they had spies in churches, from government, so the priest couldn't say anything at the mass, anything political, even traces of anything got you landed in jail or sent to Siberia, which tons of people were sent under study. It was terrible.
It's still there.
They are still living there. The Polish people that were sent there, it was like minus 60 degrees over there. There was nothing, not even structure that you could live in. They were just loaded in wagons, and then whoever they were catching people on the streets, even in towns, and they were just loading them like under Hitler. It was the same story, same system, but just different country was the invader. So a lot of priests got in jail and they were killed. They had especially big towns suffered a lot during communism, because people wanted to raise and to end this. So they had underground system of flyers and then meetings and stuff, and there was a lot of spies to prevent that, and people end up being tortured, sent to jail, mass graves that
no one even knows.
No one even knows where they are. They came at night, knock at your door, drag you out, and this is when you last saw your father or mom, just disappeared. That was terrible. Pope John Paul II played a big role to actually help to create solidarity. He was in Rome, Polish Pope, so he was very diplomatic, but on the other hand, he did a lot for solidarity to be able to actually function and then to grow in a big movement like it was in the 80s. And people strike. They did uprise in the whole country. There were days, right, that they did all over the country. And then my father was a miner in a coal mine. So I remember I was maybe like in my teens, early teens. Then I heard sirens in a town, and it's just very, very dramatic, because it's just, you don't know what's going on. It's like a war. The sirens were everywhere, and all the just whoever could make noise, it did. So it happened. Then the miners didn't get up from the underground. They started strike. It took probably 5 or 6 days. So they stayed there. But the government said people from up, they can't help them. No food, no water, nothing was supposed to be sent down to them. And they were actually thinking of murdering them, gassing them or something like that. So, but there is a lot of people in the coal mines, not only the people that are underground. So everybody was providing help, giving them food. When somebody was turning his back on of the spies, and just there was very big network of people that did that. And after like 5 or 6 days, it was not only our coal mine, it was all over Śląsk, all over, all the coal mines started, all the regions started at the same time. And this is how the government said we cannot deal with this. It's just too many
people.
Yeah. Everybody was striking, underground, above ground, the sea, you name it. Whoever, they just got on the streets. People got on the streets.
The soldiers were born in Gdańsk, right? So this this was good because finally we could say something what we want to say, right? No one was like spying on you and telling the government this is not good. This was something new for us, right? So, we're free, okay? So everything's gonna change. That's how it was. After the Solidarność starts in the 80s, things got better, right? But we didn't know what to do with this freedom. Okay, suddenly we're free, and what to do, right? We have to go to work, and now the factories kind of disappear because the socialist says there's no unemployment, right? So, if my mom worked, so it doesn't matter if this work was needed or not, she has to work. So they give them money for doing absolutely nothing, okay? And now when the system just ended, you have to actually work and produce something. And now the people from Poland, they weren't used to for that. This is, oh my God, yeah, but that's how it was. This was the actually, that's how it started, right? So we have to just change our mind and start working. Yeah, so it was, okay, we're free, and now we have to start working. Just now we think about it, the process wasn't, because maybe we're young, right? So the process wasn't such a dramatic. It's changed, of course it changed, but it didn't take a day or two. It was changing for years. Even when we left the country, everything was started building, people start working, and appreciate the job what they have. And it takes years after 50 years for a totally different system.
But now we can see the difference.
Oh, yes.
I went to my country last week, and it's different. It's like a Western country right now. It's beautiful. Everything is colorful. The communists didn't like color. I can tell you that. We had everything was gray and black, and there were no billboards, no flyers, just nothing. The streets were very sad. The people were very sad. No one was smiling. because why would you? If you had
No,
such a
but
tough
reason,
life, you were
yeah.
thinking, where do I get my next pair of shoes? And then when my bread is coming from tomorrow for my kids.
What
so-
I'm gonna watch it if I have only 2 channels TV, and the channel starts, I think, was, I don't know, 7, finish around 10 p.m. Kids have 10 minutes,
10 minutes for
cartoons
kids.
per day, and most of the program was political programs, and both channels, something music, quiz. That's it. That's what you can learn on TV. There was nothing on it. You were waiting for the 10 minutes for cartoons. Most of the time, Sunday was a special treat. We could watch Disney, Mickey Mouse, and Donald Duck. This was the best time of our week.
I feel that aspiring greater autonomy and self-determination will always be an ongoing issue. It is hard to imagine a perfect world where all parts of society are equitably situated and happy with status quo. However, this is not a negative reflection of human behavior, but rather a driver of change that contributes to the continuing development and evolution of the human race.